Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is Sunday at 10:58. So hope everyone's had a good weekend. It's been a pretty cool weekend. I had a really fun gig on Friday with Osmia. We played with a bunch of bands at Hey Sailor, which is such a cool venue. Pretty much the best venue around and super cool. We played with a bunch of bands from Portland, Maine, and yeah, it was really great time. And so I got some more things coming up with Osmia, and then got another show coming up in early November back at Hey Sailor. So there'll be a lot of promotion for that coming up. There's a little bit now, but there'll be a bunch coming up. So yeah, and want to thank I've gotten some new subscribers here on the channel, and also always love when people comment on the videos. That's really where it's at for me. So yesterday I had a pretty epic day. I watched 3 movies in a row. I went to Opera House Video. I had dinner over at my folks last night. And that's a big thing that we always do. Every time I go over there for dinner, I always get a pile of movies, and we end up watching like at least 2 or 3 movies. So last night we watched like 3 movies. It was pretty intense, but it was great. I haven't done that in a while. I watched 3 consecutive movies back to back, but it was great. We started watching the movies about 6:30 and finished up about midnight or 12:30 with like a little bit of a break. But or actually I should say we started like closer to 8 because we had dinner first. But it was cool, and I saw 3 movies that I'm going to be reviewing. The next few Film Fanatic shows are going to be about these movies that I got. I got all DVDs. They were all relatively new releases. Meghan, which is a movie I'm going to be talking about today, which came out a couple of years ago. So I got a lot to say about that one. Then today's going to be about that. And then I got with Bob Odenkirk, Nobody 2. And then also the new Steven Soderbergh movie, Presence. So these are all new movies for me. Meghan is a couple of years old. And but other than that, these were all new releases and new films I'd never seen before. So I'm going to be doing shows on all of these movies. Pretty mixed bag as far as if I like these movies or not. But the first movie I'm going to be talking about today is Meghan, which is a Blumhouse film that I obviously had heard a lot about. It came out in 2022. It's a Blumhouse film. It was directed by Gerard Johnstone, and pretty good cast. I remember when this movie first came out, I don't think I was really into seeing it in theater, but I remember when it came out a few years back. And the second one, there is a sequel that just came out on DVD and Blu-ray, I think this week. So that's what further sparked my interest to see this movie. When Meghan first came out, I had heard, well, again, I try to stay away from reviews, but there's a lot of times where I will get a general vibe or feel as to, like, generally people that I really love on YouTube that are movie film critics or movie reviewers. I will generally get a vibe from that sometimes, but so it's a combination. Sometimes I stay totally away from any kind of reviews. Sometimes barely even seeing a trailer, and if it just kind of strikes my fancy, I'll just go into it as cold as I can. And usually, obviously, that's like the best way to see a movie. But I think you have to be cautious because there's so many movies that are coming out all the time. You have to be kind of cautious, because it's expensive, and you want to, like, it's gonna, take up your whole night, your evening. So you want it to be a good experience or a fantastic experience. So I usually I'm in the middle a lot of the times. But Meghan, I had heard about. I read a little bit about it when it came out. I wasn't really interested in seeing it in the theater, and I had heard mostly pretty mixed things about it. And it's basically, the premise is it's cool in a way because it really ties into like the contemporary times that we are in with AI and all of these things. And it's interesting with this movie. It is like a sci-fi movie, and it has horror elements. But it really, a lot of the technology in the film are things that are, happening now that you can actually get, and that, we're on the verge with technology of making some of these things possible. But a lot of these things with technology, they are readily available. So it's kind of a trippy kind of commentary on where we are at, mainly on the subject of artificial intelligence. So it's pretty interesting that way. And so I had heard some fairly mixed things about this movie, and then I never did see it. I didn't see it in the theater, and then it's been out for a couple of years. I never got it on DVD or Blu-ray, and hadn't seen it. I was kind of like, I think I'm gonna pass, because it's a Blumhouse film, and I think Blumhouse puts out so many movies that it's just insane. But I think they are so, as a company, I think they're just so hit or miss sometimes. Like, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's really bad. Like The Invisible Man was really great. And then shit. There's so many movies that I liked. I liked the last Halloween movie, Halloween Ends, and there's a few other ones that were really good, but there's so many that I think are just kind of terrible. I do love the Purge franchise. That's all Blumhouse. I love those movies to death. It's one of my favorite franchises. So they do have some really good movies that they do get behind, but there's so many films that they have put out that are just so terrible. I think one of the worst ones they ever put out was the Exorcist reboot, which was god awful. So it's really hit or miss. It's really, really hit or miss with them. So that's one of the reasons I was like kind of on the fence of seeing this. So then just fast forward up until, well, really this summer, I had hung out with a couple of friends and we had gone to the movies, and somehow the people that I was hanging out with were talking about this movie Megan, and saying that they because the sequel had just come out during the summer. I think it came out this past summer, and then it just came out on DVD for rental and streaming, I guess. And they were saying how the sequel was not very good, kind of terrible. And some of these folks, some of the friends that I have, they were saying how the first one was actually really good. It was unique, it was original, it was actually really, really good. So I heard, firsthand from a few people that it was pretty good. And then so yesterday I was like, well, I went to Opera House Video to rent some movies, and then I saw it there, and I know the second one had just come out, and I was like, well, maybe I'll just bite the bullet and watch it. So I did, and then I rented the movie. I rented the movies, and then went to go pay for the movies, and the woman who was at I think her name is Gabriella, who works part time at Opera House, said that Megan was a really good movie also, and said that it's a movie that was kind of not given enough attention, basically, because it was good. So I was like, okay, cool. So again, it was like the third person or so that I know that had seen it and said it was really good, and that it was kind of underrated. So I was like, okay, I'll give this a shot. And my first impression of this movie, not before I actually saw it, was that it was kind of like an AI robot version play, with a big time kind of child's play kind of influence, which it does to a degree, but then it's really not, because essentially what this movie is about this girl who she's she's in this car accident. This little girl is in this car accident with both of her parents, and both of her parents die in this tragic accident, and then her aunt, sister's mom, ends up adopting her, but her sister is this AI computer specialist who works for this gigantic tech company, and they're building all of these AI robots. They're building like essentially like robotic pets for people and kids, and she is at the same time also experimenting with creating a fully realized robot art with AI that can be basically a childhood friend or a friend to the family. And so that's kind of the backdrop. And so what she ends up doing, this aunt, is she ends up creating this AI, this robot, to become her her niece's friend. And that's kind of the premise of the movie. And so I watched this last night, and I thought there were some things about this movie that were really interesting, and I thought the acting was pretty good. The setup in the beginning of the film was pretty good, pretty well directed. Um, I like the characters. I like the cast. Jenna Davis, who actually plays Megan, the robot, if you will. Allison Williams and Violet McGraw. Amy Donald, Madeline McGraw, and Gerard Johnstone directed this movie. Brian Jordan Alvarez, and also Ronnie Chang is also in this film. Again, the cast is really good. I particularly like um, Allison Williams, who plays the aunt, and she's pretty good, and the cast is pretty good. It's a pretty good opening half or part to this film, like the introduction to the characters. Generally, getting into this movie, I was like, okay, it's a kind of a cool premise. Somebody had told, one of the people that had told me about this movie, saying that it was really good. What they thought with this movie was that it really was unique, and it moved into some new territories around films that are about AI or robots, and those kinds of scenarios. Or even movies, well, like Child's Play, where toys come to life and they become evil, and they have these nefarious plans. And this one friend had said that this movie took that kind of idea, or those ideas, to a degree that we've seen a little bit before, mainly through with Child's Play, but did something really unique and different. So okay, that piqued my interest even more. And again, I thought the some of the cast was really good. I thought the characterization, the setup of the story was pretty good. The technology, I thought, and again, like I said in the beginning of the show, a lot of it's very contemporary. So a lot of the tech that we see in this movie are things that are readily available. So it made it very, I guess, kind of realistic and you know relatable, I guess. So it was kind of interesting, and I was into it. I was kind of I was kind of digging it. And when things turn, when you start to realize that Megan starts having her own kind of independent thoughts, her own free will, and she has these kind of nefarious plans, there's some good tension. And I thought it was well directed. I thought the building of some of this tension was very cool. There was and again, I think the cast was good, pretty solid, pretty good story. I was interested in it. Um, and I was definitely into seeing where the story go went. And for the most part, I cared about all the characters. I thought there was a cool dynamic between the girl and Megan, and the little girl, and also her aunt. I thought there was a cool, chemistry going on. And then things once they, and I would consider this movie like a science fiction with it definitely has horror elements. But I thought when the movie moved into the horror elements, particularly around the kills involving Megan, I honestly thought the kills were, and the lack of gore or violence, I thought that was not very good. I was disappointed with that. I love movies. Again, I was talking about it last night with my folks. Pretty much my favorite Halloween movie is Dark Night of the Scarecrow, and that movie came out in '81, and it was actually made for TV, and there was zero gore in that movie because it was obviously made for TV. But that movie is so creepy and just has such rich atmosphere. To me, it's one of the greatest horror movies ever made, and it's pretty much my go-to for Halloween. But it doesn't have, because of the way it was shot and it was made for TV, it doesn't have copious amounts of gore because they can't, or sex, or violence. Everything is really implied, but they really emphasize the characters, the story, the atmosphere, all of those things. And then another movie I've talked about too a lot. There's two other movies that I can think about that I can talk about that are examples of movies that are highly effective, but they don't have any gore in them, and but yet they are really intense and actually scary. Duel, the first Steven Spielberg film, also basically a made-for-TV movie. There's barely any violence in that movie, or gore for that matter, and it's incredibly riveting. And then my favorite horror exploitation movie of all time, Tourist Trap, has virtually none. And that movie had a crazy trajectory because intention the original, and when they released that film, they were going for an R rating, but it couldn't get an R rating because it didn't have the gore factor that other kind of slasher movies were doing at the time, and so it couldn't get really distributed. But it struck this really great deal. That film struck this great deal with being able to get syndicated on cable because it's essentially rated PG, and so that movie was went on to become a legendary film through syndication on television. So it's essentially a TV movie, even though it wasn't made for television. And that movie has zero gore, but it's like one of the most disturbing and just insane movies ever made. So I think right there's like three examples of movies that don't have copious amounts of gore or sex or violence, but yet they're highly effective because they just are just really crazed. They have just great atmosphere and they're just really good stories. And on the other side of things, like I love incredibly violent movies. Slasher movies are my favorite. I love when movies. Sometimes movies really need that. I mean, you look at movies like My Bloody Valentine, or even most recently in a violent nature, like it's really effective. And so I love that too, but there's a balance. It's all in the context of what the movie's about. But I think in Meghan, what this movie was, I think as far as the action or the kills in this movie, I think it really was disappointing. I think this movie could have really helped. It would have really helped this movie if it did show a little bit more. There's all these quick cutaways, which can be cool because it does leave things up to your imagination. But it felt like the reason that this movie was done that way, the impression that I got was that was done to get a PG-13 rating or to get more people to see the movie for some weird reason. And I felt like that was a decision that the studio made, Blumhouse and the director, to try to make the movie more commercial. And I felt like that was a really bad decision because I thought this movie could have used a lot more gore and made it more violent, with the kills, because the setup was really great. There was some good tension. The premise of the story was good. The characters were good. And then I felt like it could have delivered, at least with a few scenes. It didn't have to be a total slaughterhouse, but it failed really badly. And I thought that was a thing that I was disappointed with. Like when it first happened and there is this cutaway, you don't see any of it. I was like, okay, I get maybe that's like maybe could be a cool thing, like what you don't see is more terrifying kind of an idea. But then it kept happening, and I noticed it was happening all the time with the kills, and there was more kills that progressively got more somewhat intense, and yet they were pulling back further and further and further, and it left me super disappointed. Super disappointed. And that was kind of the first thing of the movie that I did not like. There were two other things about this movie that I was kind of disappointed, especially one thing that really kind of made my decision or feelings about the movie pretty obvious. again, I had heard from a friend saying that this movie, this is, the premise of this movie is something we have seen before, and that's cool. Like, um, but he did say like it took something that was, somewhat straightforward and familiar, but did something really cool and unique, and that it was creating, um, something really original, or this film kind of did something really original. And honestly, I didn't think it really did. I kept waiting for there to be some kind of reveal, or I don't know, maybe a twist to something to the story that was gonna make this movie, or give it some really new, a really new perspective, or make it really stand out. And I honestly felt this movie was pretty predictable, and it kind of just stayed with what it established, and I felt like it never really did that. It never really threw in a new element, or a series of situations of where it was like, okay, this is saying something new, or this is a different take on, or took the film in maybe a slightly unique kind of direction. And I was kind of waiting for it and thinking it was going to happen. And ultimately, I felt like it never did. It just kind of stayed with what was established, which is cool. There's nothing wrong with that if it's well done. But I felt like it never really did anything unique. It never really, like I've made that kind of comparison to Child's Play, and it kind of is to a degree because of the basic structure with a kid essentially befriending this doll, and that's kind of what this movie is about. But it's very contemporary and it's set in a very different light. But it never did anything different outside of that pretty straightforward narrative that we have seen before. It's essentially a killer doll movie, but with robots, and kind of set in a very modern kind of reality, which I liked a lot. But it never, I felt like narratively, it never really did anything different. It kind of just plodded along, and again, it was solid and it was well done, I think, for the most part. But it never did anything new for me. But the thing that really took me out of this movie, which I was really disappointed, which I thought was really, really poorly executed, was the ending. I did not like this movie at the end. The ending for this movie, I thought, was so predictable and so, um, tired. There was something so tiring about it, because I felt like it was something that we've seen so many times. I did not like the ending at all. I was like, okay, it had good characters, it had a good setup, it had a pretty good cast, good chemistry with the characters. A kind of an interesting story, even though it was something familiar, was doing something new. I loved the contemporary feel of it. There was some good tension, especially around Megan, the robot doll itself. The kills were very disappointing, and then there was no real twist, or just something new that was going to take the movie into a different direction. I feel like that didn't happen. And then I thought the ending was so paint by numbers. It really was. So ultimately, I am not going to go see. I do not have a desire to see the second one. I would honestly say this is another example of Blumhouse, not doing their job very well. And I would take a hard pass on this movie. It's super predictable, and the ending is just like, okay, okay, I yep, not surprised. So yeah, I wouldn't waste. I would take. This movie isn't terrible. It's not like, again, it has, like I said before, it's got some good qualities to it, but I've seen worse. But ultimately, it was a big letdown, and I would say, there's a lot of other films out there that are much better than this, so I would go see them before going to see Megan. And I'm definitely not going to go see or rent the new one. So kind of a disappointing film. So thanks again, and we will see you next time.